Apple, Nvidia, Samsung, Google and Tesla. All these tech giants exist only thanks to one company. TSMC. But how is it even possible that a company starting from scratch on a small island in the Pacific built an empire that the whole world depends on? How did they become so crucial that without them we wouldn't have smartphones, computers, cars or even AI? And how did one company become the greatest weapon against China, more powerful than any atomic bomb, and will this become a problem for us? An exciting story shaped by the iPhone, Nvidia, the tensions between Taiwan and China, this guy right here and a huge amount of money. I've researched it all for you, let's go. But how did TSMC actually achieve a 90% market share, especially when giants like Intel already had massive factories in the US basically making the same chips? To understand this, we need to look at what's really all about: computer chips. These tiny devices, which once filled entire rooms, are now only a few nanometers thin. For example, Apple talks about a 3 nanometer process in their M chips. By comparison, a human hair is 35,000 times thicker. But how does it all work? In 1950, when computers didn't exist yet, computers filled entire rooms. They worked with vacuum tubes and consistently turned on and off to represent zeros and ones. In the mid-20th century, the first microchips as we know them today were invented. However, these chips no longer use lamps. Instead, they contained thousands of transistors, tiny electrical switches that either allowed or stopped the flow of electricity. In 1985, there were already 270,000 transistors per microchip, which sounds like a lot, but today we are talking about around 150 billion. But if companies like Intel already had massive factories in the US producing computer chips, how could TSMC possibly compete? For that, we need to look at Intel's business model. They handle the design, production and distribution of their chips. And especially the production costs a lot of money. It therefore seemed completely impossible to compete with Intel, especially if you neither had factories nor funds to build them. But one man thought differently: Morris Chang. Born in 1931 in China, he worked for many years at Texas Instruments, a company that alongside Intel was considered one of the most advanced in chip industry. And he had the brilliant business idea. His idea: scope chip design and distribution entirely and focus only on the production, doing it better and more efficiently than anyone else. But Chang still needed a location for his company, and the location was hidden in the name: Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Company. But why Taiwan? There are many reasons. In Taiwan, there's a significantly cheaper workforce compared to other countries, which doesn't mean they are less educated, quite the opposite. Thanks to a strict education system, there's an abundance of skilled engineers and technicians, but that wasn't the main reason behind Chang's decision. To understand this, we first need to take a closer look at Taiwan itself. Around 23 million people live here, but Taiwan isn't just any island in the Pacific. The island is located right next to China's mainland, and Taiwan has a tense relationship with China. The reason lies in the island's history. After the Communist Party won the Chinese Civil War in 1949, they proclaimed the People's Republic of China. The losers fled to, you guessed it, Taiwan, where they established a completely independent democracy. This obviously doesn't sit well with the Chinese government, which still considers Taiwan a part of China. For years, the mainland has aimed to reunify Taiwan, as seen in their many demonstrations of power, and since Taiwan alone obviously wouldn't have the means to defend itself against China, it needed a deterrent. What could be better than a company on which the whole world depends on, so that other countries, especially the US, would want to defend Taiwan in case of an invasion? And since there's no oil in Taiwan, the decision fell to computer chips. Taiwan's government invested $100 million in his idea, and that laid the foundation for TSMC. From then on, TSMC would produce computer chips, while development and distribution would be left to the customers. Now, all they needed were customers. Fortunately, Jensen Huang, CEO of Nvidia, happened to be preparing to launch a gaming graphics card. But just the development alone is already immensely complicated. Producing the card themselves is completely impossible. By the way, it's 1995 and the number of transistors per chip had already reached 10 million. We can explain this with Moore's law. Back in 1965, this guy predicted that the number of transistors on a chip would double every year. That was a wild prediction, so in 1975 he revised it to a doubling every 2 years, and so far it has held true. With Nvidia, TSMC has its first big customer. The plan was simple: Nvidia invests everything in development, TSMC handles all the production, and Nvidia takes care of sales. And that plan still holds today. But to put it more professionally, TSMC has the fab while its customers are fabless, meaning they don't need the production capabilities. The plan succeeded, the GPU sold rapidly, and by 2000 TSMC's revenue had risen to $5 billion. And at this point Taiwan's government also achieved its goal. TSMC now had a 35% market share and become indispensable in global supply chains. This also meant protection for Taiwan in case of an invasion, a promise the US president reaffirmed in 2001. But that wasn't the end of the story. In 2007, Steve Jobs introduced the first iPhone and revolutionized smartphones. But guess who made the chips for it back then? Samsung. So is Samsung perhaps better than Apple? Let me know in the comments. Of course, this is far from ideal for Apple, because if something works well for the customer, you can also adopt it for your own products. That's why in 2010 Apple chose TSMC as its new partner. This pays off for both, as the Apple deal tripled TSMC's revenue to $34 billion. By 2018, smartphone chips had become TSMC's main business, and at the age of 87, Morris Chang successfully retired. TSMC now also dominates the smartphone chip market, but the story is far from over. Because just as Chang retired, in 2022 a new technology appeared. AI. And what is AI based on? On pure computing power from TSMC's computer chips. Thanks to years of success, TSMC's production line is simply the most efficient and advanced in the world. Currently we are at a 3nm process, which already means quite a lot of power. As a simple rule with chips, the smaller the nanometer specification, the more powerful and efficient the chip. That's why TSMC is currently working on a 3nm process. To put it in perspective, remember a human hair is 50,000 times larger. What has also diminished thanks to TSMC is the concern about a potential Chinese invasion. Although the US promised protection to the small island in 2001, TSMC now holds a 90% market share for chips under 3nm, making even China dependent on the company. That's why TSMC is often called the Silicon Shield, but that could soon change. The tech giant is expanding to other countries. For example, a factory in the US has just been completed, and facilities in Japan and Europe are already planned. Whether this will undermine Taiwan's strategic advantage remains to be seen. The fact is, thanks to a brilliant business model, the right customers, and the whole AI hype, TSMC increased its revenue to $85 billion in 2024, becoming the 9th most valuable company in the world. And truly every one of us has at least one device with their chips inside. But there's another company without which TSMC could never have achieved such success. This company is the only one in the world that produces the machines necessary to produce such high performance chips. Each cost $200 million, and so far only 140 have been sold. ASML, but that's a whole different topic. Sign up for TechMate to get all the important tech news once a week without spam and ads, and here's a video about how Google wants to take over the smartphone market. More reviews are coming soon, and I will see you next time. Bye.